President Bola Ahmed Tinubu says there is no going back on the tax reform bills. President Tinubu, who stated this during a media chat in Lagos, said the tax reforms were necessitated by the need to eliminate colonial-based assumptions in the nation's tax environment. The tax reforms bill has sparked controversy across the country, forcing the House of Representatives to suspend the debate on the bills earlier fixed for December 3, following mounting pressure from the 19 northern state governors. Questioned about the economic hardship following the subsidy removal, the president said he had no regrets as it had become necessary.
We were spending our future. We are spending our generation's fortunes. We were not investing.
But are we
are just deceiving ourselves. That reform is necessary. I could see the smugglers fighting back. That one doesn't affect me. It affects smuggling. Why should you have expenditures that you don't have revenue for? I don't want to question people with a 5 limousine type of vehicles on the roads. Well, we should teach management with all our programs. We have to manage our resources within our means. There's no way out that you give out fuel and allow all the entire neighboring countries as Father Christmas. I don't have any regret whatsoever removing the subsidy. It is necessary. We cannot spend our future generations' investment upfront.
But do you think it should have been phased, done in bits and
pieces?
It
is part of the fear that is unnecessary. Phased, no matter how you cut it or you slice it in segments, you still have to meet the bills. So, cut your code strictly to your size. It's what we must manage. Management is the issue. And we have no choice but to pull the handbrake. Otherwise, we are headed for slippery slopes that could result in financial disaster for not just for us, but our children and grandchildren. Where is the inheritance? Where is the pathway for prosperity?
All right, and to dive into the key issues raised in the media chat, I have with me Professor Adeniyi, Dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Bayes University here in Abuja, and the Executive Director of Yiaga Africa, Samson Itodo. Gentlemen, glad to have you join me.
Thank you.
Let me start with you, Prof. 18 months for his first media chat. The need for you address to concerns of Nigerians.
Well, first, I thought the president exceeded my expectations. In the build-up to the elections, we never had him appear in any debates, so the bar was lowered regarding his ability to engage. And of course, becoming president 18 months after, we didn't see him engaging the media. So he just got me to reduce my expectation that he's hardly going to have a one-on-one with the media. And that's why I said he exceeded my expectation. And appearing yesterday, I thought he did very well. He was obviously very confident, had a mastery of most of the issues, even though there were problems with his speech-thought coordination, but at least he communicated, and that's the most important thing. And I heard you in your introduction that there were so many questions left unanswered. Of course, yes, 1 hour with 7 veteran journalists. If you left him with only Dr. Bati and Maokbe for 1 hour, each of them having 1 hour with him, of course, it may not even be enough. Now we'll have 7 veterans, mass on him, president. 1 hour is a bit small, but of course, it's a welcome development that the president is engaging, or he has started to engage with Nigerians through the instrumentality of the media. And the call that we can make now is that it should just sustain this. After all, we were able to see, at least from our own opinion, that it's on top of issues, even though I disagree with some of his pronouncements, but at least, the confidence, a renewed confidence has been engendered, that there is some capability somewhere. What has been the problem has been, the distanciation between the president, and of course the people, because of the lacuna in communication, irrespective of the quality of men, the expertise of men, that he has around him manning the communications bit. Sometimes, you also need to hear from the principal. And that we heard from him yesterday, I think, kudos to him.
Samson, did it look or sound like the president is so obsessed with his reforms that he doesn't maybe give a hoot about its negative impact on the citizenry?
Well, I think you give it to the president. He owns these reforms. These are his reforms, and he takes full responsibility, for it. And it's a departure from what we've seen from previous presidents, at least in recent times. The last president, Buhari, I totally agree, wasn't as articulate, wasn't as vast and also on top of the issues. But at least listening to the president in that interview, he's really convinced that these reforms will deliver on their desired outcomes.
That you're convinced is one angle.
Yeah.
But what it does to the people is another angle.
Absolutely. You see, every policy has got consequences, and some could be positive and some will be negative. And some of the reforms have, very devastating effect on whether it's on the livelihoods of people, but people are going through economic hardship. I think one thing is clear from yesterday's media chat, that unlike, other presidents where we are second guessing or we are unsure whether they are aware of what Nigerians are going through as a result of some of the leadership decisions that they make, yesterday was a confirmation that the president is aware that a vast majority of Nigerians feel he has an over-bloated Federal Executive Council. And there's a great need to cut down the cost of governance. At least he's aware, that the removal of the fuel subsidy has brought untold hardship on Nigerians. And it's clear from his comments yesterday. And thirdly, he's also aware that we're somewhat not winning the fight against corruption. And some positions that he took. I do have some concerns about his response. But I see a president that understands the issues. He's quite aware of them. But whether he totally, based on his rhetoric, really feels the pain that Nigerians go through is where I think there's an issue.
Because rhetoric is different from what you get on the ground. And that will make me ask you, before we delve into some of the other issues. And Dume at a point in time said, there's a wall. The president is not getting the real information he should get concerning his policies vis-a-vis the people. Do you think that the people around him are not giving him accurate information as to how these policies or how Nigerians are really feeling?
But I think Itodo alluded to it a bit, with what I had yesterday. I'm sort of confident that he's aware of the goings on in his country, is aware of the feelings of the people. What he does afterwards is a different ball game. And of course, that's why we keep making the point that what we did from our leaders is sacrifice, and not just sacrifice by pronouncement, but sacrifice in action.
Exactly.
And if it was possible yesterday, of course there was no time, before him were 7 excellent journalists, and of course there was no way the questions would have been exhaustive. I'm not even sure each of those journalists had more than one chance to ask him questions. There were therefore still many questions that would have been asked. For instance, Mr. President, sir, you are asking us to make sacrifice, and of course you now went ahead and bought a plane of $150 million.
And the vice president's house was constructed for some billions.
That's fine. Then, of course, what about the questions around nepotism? In your appointment, what's your reaction to that? And Mr. President, sir, there are issues around you neglecting a section of this country in your appointment. How do you want to react to these things? Further to your determination to engender confidence, in all Nigerians. Realizing that, from many of his pronouncements yesterday, we are confident largely, that he's resolute about many of those policies. So it's probably not just gambling. He's not experimenting. He knows what he wants to do, and of course he's doing it. Trusting in the future of these policies, that they will become productive and efficient. So that confidence, came out from him very clearly yesterday. But there were still so many other questions that would have been asked if the time was available. And that's the point we're making, that we need this kind of engagement to be sustained. Because yes, you raise a critical question around rhetoric. I don't see some of this talk as rhetoric. Rhetorics, may just be something that is slightly whittling. But we are talking about engagement, pronouncement, and there's a way in which presidential pronouncement can galvanize others to action. But it's not just about body language alone, but pronouncement. If the pronouncement are rightly in the correct direction, of course, his many lieutenants will also key in. But where they don't hear him, or where they see less of him, or they hear less of him, of course, there could be lethargy, and it will have an overarching effect on the economy and the progress that the president himself wants the nation to make under him.
Let's begin to break it down, Samson. On tax reforms, he said, any tax reforms without an uproar is not a tax. I will ask you how you want to interpret that statement, bearing in mind that 19 state governors of the North kicked against this. And even the president of the Senate later said, because I've handled this issue before, that there will be 6 months to consult. And one was wondering, why put the cart before the horse? Why wasn't the consultation done before going to the NAS, and then it was rejected by a part of the country?
Well, I think on tax reform, again, you need to give it to the president. In terms of clarity of vision, and I say this is a departure from where we're coming from, and you must give it to the president. When I mean where we're coming from Buhari's administration.
Can we talk about,
so when you look at how he has owned the tax reform, the truth is, there's no way we can revive the Nigerian economy without having a discussion about taxation. And I know that for a lot of Nigerians, their issue is not paying taxes. The issue is, what are these taxes actually going to be used for? And that's the point about accountability. But it's a bold decision and action by the president to sort of, reconstruct our entire tax.
How about consultation and the timing?
You'll hear the president. It's one thing. I think let's look at the objective of this entire tax reform. And I really support, tax reforms. The question is also, it's how, and how was this policy actually introduced? When the president was asked about the question about consultations, and you heard what he said, and I have a problem with his response, which was, he talked about the hallmark of leadership, because yesterday's media chat, there were some leadership lessons and leadership nuggets that the president did churn out when he talked about leadership and the fact that you have to take a decision at the right time, and that whether or not you consult, you are still going to get this reaction. I thought that particular phrase, that there will be an outcry, I thought that the president shouldn't have used that remark. The president should have exercised restraint, because as a president of a country, consultation and citizens' engagement in issues like this is very, very important, because you want to galvanize, using effective language, get people, to understand the reason for the reforms, and also do what? And support the reforms. People need to see, these issues need to be debated. But I have not seen sort of a government-led public engagement and debate around these issues before it was tabled before the National Assembly. But the National Assembly is also a space, for public engagement. He has proposed a bill. Now, it behoves on the National Assembly and the Speaker of the House and the House of Rep have begun those consultations. Now, whether or not they're going to take
They've already
on board,
stepped it down. I mean, it's a
yeah,
hold.
but it's still going to come back
Of course.
when they resume.
That's why
But
the issue
whether
of
or not they're
consult-
going to take on board, some of the concerns. This sort of green light I see from the president when one of the journalists asked him yesterday about compromise. He did indicate that he's open to having a compromise, on this issue. And so we have to not just watch, but wait to see, whose interest, is going to be protected at the end of the day. Is it the vast majority of people who are below the pyramid, or the top 1%?
Like he has said.
These are, like he has said, that this is about taxing the rich, to support the poor. We have to see how this will be operationalized.
All right.
But as a country, we've got to expand the tax net. We also need to ensure that our revenue streams,
but there's a question of trust.
But there's a question of trust.
All right. We cannot we cannot rectify, or rather retool, the economy with the old ways. Yes, tradition kills. We all know that. We used to do it this way, so let's continue. It kills. But then there is a way that seems right. So, with the president's, for example, he's been accused, or this administration has been accused of a bloated government, and it's not just an accusation. This is the biggest ever in a time when Nigerians, let's face it, the economic climate is harsh. Prices are increasing every day. Transportation, Nigerians are having a rough, tough, horrid time. But the president says, in fact, he said, I'm not going to reduce my cabinet.
If you want to approach it simply, you probably asked, is it the bloated cabinet that is causing the hardship, or are we saying that let's reduce the cabinet so that we can
because with the bloated cabinet, you're talking about more money paid to people,
that's right,
more money to run the government. That's part of the reason why people are talking about the bloated government.
That's fine, but of course.
And then again, is it really the size or the productivity
and efficiency,
effectiveness of people you put in, whether they're 10 or 28?
Again, that's why I'm saying that sometimes, the signaling, from a leader can actually be very, very helpful. He was asked that question yesterday, and his response was quite reassuring, very confident response, because he said very clearly that I'm satisfied with the number I have. I know why I put each person where they are, and they are all performing, So when you hear that from a leader, a president, of course, it has a way of giving you confidence that he probably knows much more than the rest of us know, and probably he knows what he's doing. So it's that confidence, that we need, that often comes from
somebody
engagement.
When you keep talking about confidence, somebody said that if you lie and keep on lying and do it confidently, people will believe you.
But eventually people will see through your lies,
Yeah, of course, we know that lies can run for 100 days.
Lies can't lie forever.
But I'm talking about the question of...
There are different ways in which you can measure the impact of leadership. You assess it in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term. And that's why in planning, you talk about strategy.
Yeah.
And when you have strategy, of course, you have tactics, Tactics as the minute measures that you take towards the realization of the overall strategy. But in the circumstance, we're saying that, or rather, I'm saying that, the tactics I saw from him yesterday was reassuring, even though there are limitations. That's the point I'm making. And of course, he said, yes, we know it is the largest cabinet we ever have. And of course, people have made comparison with the United States, a huge, prosperous country, but not more than 15 secretaries. And that's, but of course, he again said it, that look, this is the reason why I'm having them. I trust them. I'm confident in them. And they are performing.
Do you buy into that reason? I mean, that's a question somebody will ask. Apparently, you buy into that reason.
I'm not sure it's about me. I'm just
because you're a Nigerian.
Yeah, but I'm trying to say that there are some other there are bigger issues that we actually need to focus on, which is what you raised earlier around the tax. How can tax give us much more revenue? But if you look at it in terms of what we are losing, having 50 members in the cabinet, 50 cabinet members, compare with what we are losing in corruption, in waste, and all of that, it just pales into insignificance.
Okay,
and of course, if you want me, I would say that his response on the question around corruption was not the kind of response I would have been expecting.
You mentioned revenue. Samson, before I take a breath, let me take you up on it. He talks about aligning expenditures with revenues. We have a budget deficit of 13 trillion, debt servicing of 15.8 trillion, which with the budget on infrastructure, health sector, agriculture, it dwarfs it. I mean, it swallows it. And then expected revenue of 34.82 trillion. In 2024, government generated 14.55 trillion. Does this work for you?
First, it doesn't work for me. The point about our budgeting system, it's one that's really problematic. I don't know which country, operates multiple budgets in a fiscal year. And I thought that what this administration could have counted and should aim to count, as its success and working with National Assembly, is to see how we fix our budgeting system. This point where we're implementing multiple budgets, it's problematic. The second, if you look at the point you made about revenue, yes, again, to a large extent, either the role that FIRS have played, the whole, going on in the oil and gas sector, and then you also look at, issues relating to whether you call it exports. The government has, generated some revenue, but the question is, where are we spending our monies? And whether it is addressing the bigger problem and challenges that people are facing. When the president took a position about price control yesterday, I was very worried because, again, in his estimation, some of the policies of this administration, whether you call it competitive policies or creating a friendly business environment for markets to thrive, and that will create an opportunity where, there will be a boom of different sort of service providers, and there will be competition there. That way it will crash the prices. It's one that I have problems with, because if you look at, for the average Nigerian on the street, they are considering the cost of rice, they are considering the cost of palm oil, the cost of gari. And if government is not going to step in, to modulate or control these prices, and you're grappling with a rising inflation rate, and people's purchasing power is diminishing on an hourly basis, then there's a great need for government to actually step in. And I don't really, from my standpoint, I don't think that the position taken by the president not to either intervene in price control and using perhaps oil and gas, what's happening with the Dangote and NNPC and the others as a case study, I think to a large extent might amount to false equivalence in my view.
All right. I'll keep you on pause, gentlemen. We'll be back in just a bit and we'll continue this discussion. You're watching Prime Time, Rights Prime Time. The conversation continues with my guest in the studio after this timeout. Don't go away. We're glad to have you back. You're still watching Arise Prime Time here on Arise News. We offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. The I'm August. I still have in the studio with me Professor Adeniyi, Dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Base University, and the Executive Director of Yiaga Africa, Samson Itodo. We'll continue the discussion or conversation on those issues from where we left off. For some, before I get into agriculture and the recent security incident that happened in Bloated State, we drive it to food security. I mean, you're talking about confidence. It's fantastic to be confident. I love confidence. You can't really do anything without confidence. But some felt in some quarters there's a thin line between confidence and arrogance. Do you think that it was not just a question of confidence, it was a little bit of arrogance probably on the part of the president?
Indeed, I want to believe that you've also you asked the question and you've answered it yourself, sort of. Yes, and I'll tell you how. Because there's a thin line between the two. Those traits are simply attitudinal, and of course, assessing them is very subjective. It just depends on how you see it. If you're an excellent person, you're a very good person. People will think that you are arrogant.
If you keep to yourself, sometimes
you think you are shy. So it just depends on who is judging you. If somebody admires you, for instance, even though you are still below average, they could still see you as an excellent person. Not necessarily in the light of arrogance. So I think it depends on who is making the assessment, really. But again, I would rather keep an open mind, try as much as possible to be objective, even though I know objectivity is also problematic.
Subjective.
But of course, the closer we are to objectivity, the better for us in the assessment of processes and procedures, particularly a presidential media chat like yesterday was. But the point I want us to take away from it is just that to feel that it's probably another time for us to ramp up the advocacy, the agitation for more engagement. 18 months is rather too late, too late, and for the president to stay away without directly engaging with the people through the instrument of the media. Before now, in the Obasanjo period, if I'm not mistaken, it used to be a monthly thing. There's nothing wrong with it because in some other climes, we also see presidents engaging the media on the go, almost on an everyday basis, and sometimes on a weekly basis, or whenever the occasion arises. After the conclusion of every event, they take out time to talk to the media. These things are very, very galvanizing. They are very helpful. They can be very motivating, helpful to the citizenry. They feel a sense of leadership. And of course, there are different ways in which, pronouncements, spur productivity, because if you are not stimulated, you are not inspired, by the leaders above you, then of course, lethargy might just unconsciously creep in. We want to see this as a new beginning. And of course, the question here is sustainability, or the prayer here is that let's have sustainability, continuity, as the case could be.
All right, discussing revenues further. Why should we have expenditures you don't have revenue for? That's the president speaking. Yet 9.4 billion is being proposed for travel and catering for the president and his vice. 344.85 billion for lawmakers at a time some Nigerians have lost their lives because they went searching for food. Samson.
Yeah, again, I talked about the budget system, and there are certain recurring budget items that make it to, our budget annually. And if the president, was calling on Nigerians to be understanding, to be patient, and he gave a stellar leadership class yesterday about management and how we need to cut down waste. And I say give it to him. I did enjoy the media chat as a student of leadership, hearing him speak about those, but also how this moment calls for austerity measures. Now, what Nigerians also want to see is, as the president of the country, your very potent economic policy tool, which is your budget, should also, have those trappings of cutting down cost and waste. If you're expending that huge amount of money, on travels, And there are also other budget items, which in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be also looking at those. I think there's so much that the president and the presidency and all those in the public office can do with cutting down. Because don't ask Nigerians to make sacrifices if you are not willing to make those sacrifices.
Let me push that further to Prof. Managing is a fantastic principle of life. Yeah. We all know that. I agree with that. I do that. In fact, recently, I've been trying to cut down on costs. Yeah.
We all
have no choice because I have to pay school fees. I have to pay house rent. That is tripling or quadrupling. Yeah. The presidency advises Nigerians to learn to manage by turning off the lights, and he doesn't believe in price control. Is this not the crux of the matter between our leaders and the led, where the government speaks with one voice? You say, Nigerians, be patient, tighten your belt, manage light, but the government doesn't seem to be doing that.
Yeah, it's actually the crux of the matter, just like you said. It's just about optics, you know. The example you are showing as a leader and how you want the followers to key into your steps, you know. We know, even in history, most of our leaders often have good intention, and they are always able to say the right things, you know, but it's not about saying the right things, it's more about the action that you exhibit, you know. Are your actions matching your words?
The action speaks louder than voice.
Yeah, action speaks louder than voice, you know, but what we want from our leaders at every point in time is for their actions, you know, to match their words, or rather for their actions to be louder than their pronouncements. And we made the point severally again that there were so many other things that we would have wanted the president to address yesterday. Yes, he had addressed some bits and pieces here, even though, you know, he could still have given some details. But he's the president. Usually presidents don't give...
There are so many things I want to get out here. Okay. So let's run faster. He talked about lithium. Abundance, this sounds interesting. Abundance of lithium both in Nasarawa and Kaduna to support the nation's automobile industry. This sounds good to the ears with government lifting mining activities recently. Your sense?
No, absolutely. I think we also need to commend the governors of those states who have been very vocal and frontal in making huge investments and trying to harness that potential, because Nigeria is such a country. When we say that we are naturally endowed with a lot of resources, it's not just words of mouth, it's actually reality. And our ability to harness those will potentially fix some of the economic challenges that we face. You see, the economic reality is forcing states to begin to look inward, to harness those resources, convert them, and then see how you generate revenue. But not just that, but you also fix a social problem, and that's unemployment, because you're creating jobs. And we already have to a large extent, brilliant local content legislation. We also see how you have Nigerian companies and investments being made around mining. I think the Minister of Mining is doing really well with mining licenses, but also securing those mines. And you have this sort of security infrastructure to secure our mines, because the same challenge you have, you know, in the Niger Delta is also the same sort of insecurity driven by extractives around mining. So I totally agree, and I think that that's one aspect that we need to beam our satellites. However, the point about accountability is critical, because tapping those resources and the revenue from those resources, if they are not plunged back into the economy to fix the social conditions that people actually face, then there is no point actually harnessing those resources.
Yeah. Accountability. A bold attempt to bring down inflation 34.6% to 15%. But the farmers are not going to the farms. High interest rate discourage manufacturing, and the harsh economic climate for business. Do you see the government? Is that some say it's far-fetched?
Yeah, it looks very ambitious, more like a tall order, you know, because the macroeconomic indices, you know, are not quite indicative of their ability to achieve that percentage. You know, but again, there's nothing wrong in trying, What are they going to continue to do about insecurity? He said yesterday that he has confidence in the security chiefs. Yes, we know. They're actually doing their best. And of course, the Chief of Defense Staff is also always very forthcoming, very volunteering. It's out there every other day explaining to Nigerians, assuring Nigerians, calling for their support, such that they can be successful at the level of non-kinetic, because we actually know that the bulk of the problem is not just about the solution is not just in brute force, It also has to do with our political economy, which over the years has produced, sets of nihilists, criminals, bandits, and all of that are troubling us.
Now you talked about
we need to deal with the fundamentals, and part of that fundamental is essentially good governance, But good governance may not necessarily be achieved in the short term, in the long term. In the short term, I beg your pardon. In the short term. But what we can do, to achieve good governance in the long term is to present the right optics, the right attitude, proper sacrifice, allow your action to match your words, not you asking me to make sacrifice in the next moment where I see you luxuriating. Of course, it will make me to be distanced from you at the level of belief, and trust, and interest or confidence in your ability to actually deliver.
Yeah, Samson, 15 killed in Plateau State less than 34 hours after stakeholders held a security meeting for peaceful Yuletide. But the president says, I'm proud of what my security chiefs are doing, no probe.
Well, the president foreclosed any conversation about probe. Now, there are two things there. The first is, does the president care about accountability? The people calling for probe are calling for probe because there are several questions that are unanswered. And as the president of the country, you can't make...
Incrementally every year, the budget for security and defense keeps increasing.
Yeah, even if not probe, I think that the Nigerian people deserve, information, they deserve updates, and they need to know how their monies are being spent, because if the output is not commensurate with the inputs, people are going to ask questions. And so I think that subsequently, the president's rhetoric around accountability, needs to be strong, especially the discourse about anti-corruption, where he talked about preventive measures. Yes, great, but there are grand corruption cases, things about conviction, things about the role of the courts, the role of the institutions, not just EFCC, ICPC and other agencies. I think that the president needs to take strong actions, whether in words and in actions, to galvanizing these agencies.
Optics.
I think it's even beyond optics. Yes, optics is great in public leadership, but you can have optics without desired outcomes.
Oh, okay.
And so you need to strike a balance between optics, which is your body language to communicate your vision, to galvanize people around certain objectives. But then those objectives, people need to see that this pathway you're charting is taking them to that destination. And not just see, but they need to feel it. And that's why the president has an opportunity. January 1, he, of course, will speak to the nation. And I think that some of these issues that he didn't address, issues around electoral reforms, because we are midterm, by next year, we will be less than 2 years to the general elections. What's his position on electoral reforms? I hope that he would articulate that in his New Year message. Okay. The point about implementation of the decision of the Supreme Court regarding local governments is equally important. He talked about it yesterday.
No, but the Supreme Court has decided already.
But the Supreme Court has decided. But there's a Federal Government Implementation Committee. You have governors who are pushing against this. How is he able, to ensure independence at that level? And lastly, is this point about social cohesion and national integration, that the president needs to really lead, a national reconciliation, or perhaps, because we've gone past the election now, but there are some actions the president needs to take to inspire confidence that every part of Nigeria is important, and he's not focused on a particular section of the country when he considers critical political appointments.
He talked about that. We'll get to Stampede, probably that will be the last, but let me bring in some issues because we'll have little time. As a general rule, rich countries have higher prices, while poorer countries and countries that produce and export oil have significantly lower prices. Why is Nigeria's case different? We are very high, $0.78 or something. Only Gabon is higher. Libya, Egypt, Angola, Algeria, all these are very low at 0.33. Why is our own different?
I think we have to cut ourselves some slack, for a moment. It's been 23 years since we produce fuel in this country. And if not for Dangote, we would probably not have celebrated this year. In December last year, we were told that Port Harcourt refinery was mechanically completed, but until about a few weeks ago, before production actually began. But even now, it looks from what we see, reports we see in the press, it looks like something that is in fits and starts. So we are still struggling. Apart from, other than the efforts of a private sector. Genius, Alhaji Aliko Dangote. It's a very tough one. It's a very difficult one. I know it might take time before we stabilize, but of course, again, we want to trust in the assurance of the government. That they want to ramp up production. 2.2 million barrels per day. Hopefully, one of the benchmark. For 2025 budget, I think by the time we begin to up our ante in this regard, then we can begin to talk about, a reduction in price. Remember what the president also said yesterday, that he doesn't believe in price control, unfortunately, but market forces will work out the prices. But for market forces to rightly work out the prices,
but is it really about the president or about the people?
Well, it's his belief. I think it's what he believes. Yeah. And of course, if a president believes
what he believes, does it work out on the ground? Because they had a board.
Yeah. Maybe his policies.
Regular, what did you call it? Control board. That the vice president is supposed to be the chairman. There's that board there.
Indy, I think the point he makes about the 2-point-something million barrel per day. There's one action. If you don't fix oil theft,
absolutely,
there's no way we're going to make those targets.
Yeah,
and they are there. I mean, I've always said,
and the principalities that are behind.
I've always said that you tell Nigerians that there are people ripping Nigeria off there. Are they ghosts?
They're not.
Can we get them? Why does the population?
They know those people.
That's what I always ask. But on the Stampede, the president says he has done it in Bodilon for 25 years and there was never anything else. So he lays blame at the foot of the organizers. What about the root cause of the trouble? If we address, he lays blame at the organizers. Well, how do you see that? What about the root cause? Why are people trying to kill themselves for food? If there's food, will people get there?
Because they are poor. It's the same thing we say, why do people sell their votes at elections? One of the reasons is they are poor. So politicians weaponize poverty. And this is why the point about, improving the social conditions of people has to be at the heart of governance. There's a reason why the fundamental function of government is the welfare and the security of the people. The contracts that people enter with political leaders is that they want their lives to be better.
Yeah.
So if their lives are not better,
you're not doing anything.
You're not doing anything. So the priority is to focus on how to make their lives better. But I think on the Stampede, there are certain, standard operating procedures that need, not just to be developed, but people need to be very conscious.
Yeah, the state governments now are making, you must register, you must have a place where you have multiple access points.
Things about crowd control. But I think we as a people, and I don't say this, with disrespect to those who have actually lost their life, we need to commiserate with the families.
Yeah.
But I think that both organizers and we as Nigerians, this time actually calls for patience, understanding, and also cooperation.
You can see. Does he have patience?
No, but
I know what you're talking about.
But we cannot, because even you see this even on the streets. Nigerians don't like to queue.
Which is bad.
Which is really bad.
I see
and that's a cultural thing that
will
needs to be fixed.
Yes, Samson. Just briefly, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Oni's ex-wife, Hamzat, owner of the FM radio and principal of Abashurun School, where this event occurred, they've been remanded in custody on a 4-count charge should rendering charity be criminalized.
That's a very difficult one. First of all, condolences to those who lost their lives. And it's all been said here. You know, what is important is for us to be mindful of health and safety protocols. You know, even if we want to say it's a cultural thing, it's fine. You know, it's a kind of pattern that we need to ingrain into our culture and ways of life. Our government has to be helpful here, you know, through legislation. Of course, I want to believe that we'll have appropriate legislations that can deal with it. But as a matter of rule, as a matter of procedure, you know, it's something that we should be mindful of, and we'll have the security agencies to help us enforce this. Otherwise, we'll continue to lose lives, you know, regrettably, realizing that it is not just about sharing of palliatives. The Gilead that we often witness is sometimes even on the road, you know, maybe out of recklessness, you know, of drivers, you know, motorists, and all of that. Simple rules that we need to obey, you know, we take them for granted. We need to be mindful of health and safety.
All right, Professor Adeniyi, Dean, School of Postgraduate Studies, Space University, and Samson Itodo, Executive Director, Yiaga. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Arise.
And compliments of the season.
Same to you. I hope I will celebrate the Christmas.
You will.
Well, that's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Do join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, goodbye and thank you for watching.